going to suggest for a moment that one should be proud of any criminals. But if there were a Nobel Prize for criminal ingenuity, I have to say that I would give it to these young men.
We bumped into this girl, we just started speaking, and from there we got the ideas of getting information off her and taking it from there.
70% of cases that we deal with, there will be an insider involvement somewhere. Because it's all very well to be a criminal, but you need some expert help.
Any sort of scam that you're going to enter into, you need the insider. The insider is the most important person in any operation. If you like, it's a fraudster's paradise.
Keith Cheeseman is a master of manipulation. A convicted fraudster who specialized in gaining the trust of well-placed employees in financial institutions and using them to carry out his frauds.
You need an insider, you have to have an insider. Because if I'm controlling the person that's putting information into that computer, then I've got control of that computer.
It was in a city wine bar in London in 1997 that Cheeseman first met Elaine, a young computer specialist who worked for a major investment bank. She was flattered by his attentions. He saw her as the inside route to a £15 million fraud.
I'm not the best of looking guys, but I've been tremendously successful with women because I'm a crook. Women have this fantasy, if you like, about being mixed up with a crook. It's a bit of excitement, added little bit of excitement, and they love it.
He was, buying her nice drinks and charming her, as Keith Cheeseman is able to do. And eventually they formed a relationship, and as it developed, Elaine became more and more under his control.
She played out initially to my chauffeur. My chauffeur introduced us, I got on well with her, good kid, and we decided to do a couple of things together, and I got her to work on setting me up these accounts. He span her a line of saying, well, I need to get away from this country, that I need money desperately because I'm in trouble in business. And Elaine said, well, I know exactly how to help you. I'm in a position to get money from where I work. And this was music to Keith's ears.
Elaine's position in the bank meant she could use her computer to view the account details of some of the bank's most high-profile clients.
From accessing client accounts, she knew who had, the major balances on their accounts, so she identified some of the key account holders, and that was Sean Connery's wife, Lady Beaverbrook, and Russell Brand, the newspaper astrologer.
Although Elaine could read the targeted accounts, she couldn't access or alter them. To get round that, she and Cheeseman came up with a ploy to replace the original accounts with replicas they could control.
She was able to recreate mirror image accounts, dummy accounts, on a separate area of the computer system that only she had access to. She was typing line by line account details of stocks and shares, one after the other, at great length, and it took many, many hours to reproduce the history of those accounts, and they had to match perfectly.
Having created the ghost accounts, the conspirators were ready for the next stage, the swap. Elaine had to find a time when, undetected, she could replace the real accounts with the fake ones.
Very cleverly what she'd worked out, that nobody would realise what she was doing, that at a given point on a certain weekend probably, she could quite easily lift the electronic link between her system and the main systems within the bank, overwrite the genuine accounts, which would effectively now put Elaine in control.
With the accounts fully accessible, Cheeseman would be able to transfer the money from the bank to a series of secret offshore accounts.
Sitting here, I can transfer money to South Africa, Lithuania, Australia,
America. The world has got much smaller because of the computer, and it's made it more easily accessible for you to transfer anywhere, and you can have an account anywhere.
With the money out of the country, there would be one final and vital task for Cheeseman's insider to perform if their tracks were to be covered. The account, which Elaine now controlled, had to be eliminated. There would be no computer record that had ever existed, let alone where the money had gone.
That account would then be untraceable a couple of weeks later because it would disappear off the computer screen. So nobody knew it even happened.
That was the plan. But there was something that Elaine and Cheeseman didn't know. Shortly after they'd gained access to the accounts, the police, who were watching Cheeseman, well known to them as a fraudster, made the link to Elaine. The fraud squad moved in.
We sent in a team of maintenance people who actually installed cameras in the ceiling above where she was working at her desk. And at the same time, we had hot wired all the terminals with lines coming up into our control room, about 2 floors above her. And the printers were printing out everything that she was doing, and we were storing all of that data onto hard disk. So we had conclusive evidence.
Every moment of her working day was being meticulously scrutinized. The evidence which would seal her fate and provide the vital link to Cheeseman was building up.
We were monitoring Elaine on this particular afternoon when she came in, and she was diligently working away, typing up the final stages of the accounts and telling Keith that it was all coming together on the telephone.
The police decided they had all they needed. When they swooped, it was clear Elaine was planning a new life abroad with Cheeseman.
When we arrested her, we found the suitcase packed and ready to go. And sadly, I think she was deluding herself, because I think even if she had have got the money for Cheeseman, he wouldn't have been there when she arrived in sunny Spain. He'd have been long gone, and she would have been left, as I say, high and dry, on her own, to face the music.
Cheeseman was sentenced to 8 years for this and other frauds. Elaine, the insider at the heart of the plot, was given an 18-month suspended sentence.
Every day a bank is opening in London, and every day there's more opportunity for the bank fraudster. It's our paradise, it's our Xanadu, isn't it? It's lovely, keep opening, and I'll keep trying to shut you.
It was, by any accounts, a spectacular and audacious heist. And once again, it depended on crucial information provided by a well-placed insider. But this time, the perpetrators were not experienced professional fraudsters. They were young college dropouts, whose elaborate hoax climaxed in November 1997 with the theft in London of £1.5 million worth of diamonds, belonging to one of the most exclusive jewellers in the world. This is one of the men who pulled off that heist. His name is Saq Mumtaz, and he's been involved in fraud, mostly with credit cards, since he was a teenager.
My parents told me I was a really naughty kid, so from school I've always messed around. If I'm really interested in something, then fair enough, but as soon as I lose interest, then that's it, and it's mischief time.
Zach grew up in Cheetham Hill in Manchester with the childhood friends who later became his criminal partners. They were bright kids, but dropped out of their business course when they got hooked on the excitement and easy rewards of credit card fraud.
I try to stay out of trouble, but sometimes it's just there. I'm an opportunist. If the opportunity is there, then I take it.
It was in a snooker hall that Saq had a chance meeting which was to lead to his gang's most ambitious fraud. She was an insider, an employee of American Express, with access to the confidential financial records of some of the richest people in the world.
This is where it actually started from. Came in like we used to, and we was playing snooker. I was winning as usual, and we bumped into this girl. We just started speaking in general, and she basically told us about American Express, that she worked there. And from there we got the ideas of getting information off her and taking it from there. You know, we phoned her up a week later, just speaking to her, and it was basically getting her confidence first, you know.
But could their insider really deliver? They decided to test her. The lads were Manchester United followers, with the encyclopedic knowledge of true fans. They asked the girl from Amex to produce the personal details of some of the team's star players. The information checked out perfectly. It was time to move up market.
We'd give her a name and she'd type it in, and our list of names would come up. Say, in the sense with Madonna, her saying name's Ciccone, so that would come up, and we'd go through accounts. We'd say certain details, like say a national insurance number or a passport number. I would start gathering information from the statements to where they've shopped in the last few weeks to what the spending pattern was. I mean, she wasn't even aware of what we was doing at the time. But later on, you know, we made sure, you know, we'd take care of her. You know, send her fur coats, little gifts like that.
To choose their targets, Saq and the boys turned to magazines like Harper's & Queen and Vanity Fair. Then, with the help of the girl from Amex, they built up a complex picture of their victims. Not just personal details such as home telephone numbers, but where they shopped and even what they bought.
Like a jigsaw, and once it's completed, it's there in front of you. It's a good day's work, hard day's work. We'd have all that before we even tried to attempt making transactions.
Eventually they were ready to strike. This would be the first real test of all their preparation. They began accessing accounts with limits running to hundreds of thousands of pounds.
You just phone them up, say, I'm Mr. So-and-so, I'd like to make a purchase, and they'd just go through the security checks, a normal security check, and even if they feel this person might not be 100%, might not be the genuine person, but once they've asked the security questions, so there's a certain amount they do, and then after that the transaction has to go through.
With an insider supplying information to the gang, American Express was left powerless against their frauds. Cardholders had no secrets from Saq and his friends, and there was little the company could do about it.
They know where you regularly shop. They know your full personal details. They may even have access to the original application that you filled in at the time you opened the card. Therefore, all of the security measures that might be applied to your transaction, i.e. by the retailer asking you, you know, your mother's maiden name, the number of your house, the postcode, all of that could be in the hands of criminals.
But there was another reason to target the super rich, and Saq and his gang set out to exploit it. The truly wealthy seldom shop for themselves. The gang simply ordered what they wanted over the phone. They didn't even need to step out of the front door.
Sometimes we'd hire a chauffeur, send a chauffeur in, you know, depending on whose car it was. If it's someone, say, royalty, famous, make it look good, like he says. Not anyone can walk in a shop and collect a Rolex.
Many people that are very wealthy are very busy people, and perhaps don't worry too much about their spending and don't bother to check their accounts or have people doing it for them. And the likelihood is that you get a long run with the card, buying goods, before anybody ever detects it.
Once you've done it again and again, confidence was sky high. You know, we wouldn't even think about getting caught. Basically having the confidence of believing that you can let's just say outblag the other person on the line.
To select their next targets, the gang turned to a reference book, Who's Who in the Arab World. From sultans to oil magnates, they were all there. And for the gang, it was then a simple step to check the names against American Express records and access their accounts. After that, it was all down to acting.
Obviously, you'd have to put up a certain accent, you know, you can't just do a Mancunian accent. You'd put up a mature accent depending on who you was doing. Say if she's doing someone from the Arab world, you do a bit of, you do an accent with broken English, and you just put up an act. You got to remember, you're on the other end of a phone, you know, they're not actually seeing you. You just close your eyes and imagine you've got all the money in the world. How would you live? Then pretend the world is your oyster.
The con artist knows no bounds, and they love to ham it up. And of course sometimes they even pass themselves off as the individual themselves and pose as that person, which is designed in a bigger sting, again, to give confidence the potential victim, well, I probably am dealing with this very well-known person.
You wouldn't go out your way of being polite, because you've got to remember, I mean, if you're royalty, you can act the way you like. You know, you don't have to be educated. So there'd be times when they'd repeat a question, and you'd say, are you talking to me like this? Do you know who I am? And that would put them on a backward step to be like, oh, we're sorry, Your Highness, we didn't mean to offend you. And we'd say, I could buy a certain amount. What are you doing? It'd make it feel awkward in a sense, you know. Look, you've just asked me where I've shopped last or how much money I've spent, you know. Don't you believe who I am? A lot of it's got to do with dreams. You get general people out there, they wish to win the lottery and they'd buy this and buy that. We just do it with credit cards.
It was a long way from the snooker halls of Cheetham Hill. The boys weren't just stealing money from the super rich, they were adopting their lifestyles. They could go wherever they wanted and be whoever they desired.
You'd get up one day and you look outside the window and it's raining in Manchester, and you just like, you think, oh my, they're going somewhere sunnier. We'd be here every other week, you know, flying out to somewhere or another, America, Europe, Asia, and we'd just be taking flights out here, there and everywhere. It was playing the game, it was good fun, you know. You was living different lives. You'd be, you know, someone else, you know, people would be looking at you differently and, you know, judge you differently. It was good to get a taste of that.
And the more they got a taste for the high life, the more they understood it. They became better and better at being the rich and famous they were impersonating. They also became more and more hooked on the glamour and danger. Then, one day they stumbled across an advert in a magazine, which gave them the idea for their biggest scam to date.
You're sitting at the airport, you've got time on your hands before the flight, you get one of these glossy magazines, Vanity Fair or Hello magazine, and you could come across something like this, a necklace from Bijan. It's valued at $500,000, and it's just stunning, you know. We decided to target this shop.
Bijan in Los Angeles is one of the most exclusive jewelers in the world. But they were little match for the boys from Cheetham Hill. The jewelers were about to fall victim to a spectacular hoax which would cost them £1.5 million in diamonds. Armed only with an advert from a glossy magazine and a healthy measure of bravado, a gang of minor credit card fraudsters from Manchester were about to take on the most exclusive jewellers in the world. Their target, £1.5 million worth of diamonds.
There are little league criminals and major league criminals, and the major league criminals have made the quantum leap. Now, how do you do that? Well, it's a developing process. You start off perhaps with nickels and dimes stuff, but gradually, if you're successful and you're cunning enough and clever enough that you go on making profit, eventually you're able to finance your next deal on the back of the first one.
From a flat in Manchester, Saq Mumtaz and his gang devised an extravagant plan to hoax American jewellers Bijan. Through their insider at American Express, they established that Mohammed, the brother of the Sultan of Brunei, the richest man in the world, was a regular client of the jewellers.
Through our research, we'd found out that a Prince Mohammed had shot there a few months back. So we decided that it looked good that he'd already shot there, that we'd phone him and said we'd like to obtain some more jewellery, and because they've already made transactions with him, we thought we'd get their confidence.
Masquerading as the prince's aide, Saq phoned Bijan and left a message asking the jewellers to phone back. He took the gamble of giving the real phone number of the prince's palace office. He was relying on the fact that when the jewellers phoned back, they would not get directly through to the prince's suite.
He was aware that if you phoned up the palace, you're not going to get through to the prince. There'd be an aide there, he'd take a message.
The jewellers did try and contact Prince Mohammed by using this phone number, and a lady answered and said, well, yes, this is the Brunei Royal Palace, but I'm afraid it's rather late here and the prince has retired to bed, so it's quite impossible to talk to him now. Please ring back in the morning.
It was a high-risk strategy, but it worked. The following morning, assuming that the jewellers had attempted to return the call, Saq phoned them again.
The defendant, posing as Prince Mohammed of Brunei, makes a phone call from what he says is a satellite phone because he's on an aeroplane to the jewellers in New York.
In fact, the prince's private jet was the kitchen in Manchester, and its jet engines a cooker extractor fan.
It's an extraordinary feat of play acting and an extraordinary feat of imagination from first to last.
The gang was elated, and not a little surprised by their own success. Their next step was to invent a reason for the Bijan representatives to come to London.
Once the initial conversation, we got a good reaction. We inquired about a certain amount of jewellery. The excuse that we used for him to come over was that there was going to be a wedding of one of the prince's nephews, and that it would be good if you could come over and bring a certain selection of jewellery.
Bijans essentially conduct their business this way. They have jewels and watches and brooches, etc., made for measure, made to order. They're quite prepared to travel anywhere across the world to deliver jewellery.
The merchants who provide fabulous goods of this kind to the super rich don't talk about money or price until after the transaction has been concluded. At no time was price ever discussed. At no time was the dirty subject of money ever even raised between the prince and the jewellers.
To get someone over with that amount of jewellery, you'd have to do it at a very big scale, so we decided to hire a Learjet.
Of course, with their inside track to some of Amex's wealthiest clients, hiring a Learjet was no problem. They settled the $100,000 bill with a card belonging to an investment banker from Luxembourg. The jewellers were left in little doubt. They really were dealing with the royal family of Brunei.
One can't imagine they had ever flown on a private jet or any of the things which they employed in this case, and yet they were able to imagine the way that vastly wealthy people would behave in order to dupe the jewellers into believing that they were such people.
I mean, you're on the other side and you're looking at it, there's a Learjet waiting for you at the airport. The assistants, they were probably looking at it, their eyes were wide open, thinking, we're going to get a big sale, big commission, we're going to fly over to London, treated like royalty. They've flown over, they landed at Luton Airport where there was a limousine. There was flowers greeting them there, and they just made to feel at ease.
The plotters were now faced with the problem of getting the gems through customs. They knew that the super rich were only subjected to spot checks by customs when they arrived on private runways, and so they persuaded the jewellers not to declare the diamonds. Fearful of losing a large commission, the representatives complied.
They were whisked away to a five-star Mayfair hotel where there were flowers and whiskey and wine and everything that could be imagined and wished.
So far, so good. The gems were now in London, and the jewellers were enjoying the comforts of an overnight stay in a five-star hotel. But for the lads in Manchester, it was all getting a bit out of hand. They'd never really expected to get this far, and from now on, they'd have to busk it.
It was playing it by ear now, it's a matter of you had to somehow or another try and get the jewellery off him without being violent or anything.
This was the difficult bit. It was all very well being Prince Mohammed over a phone. Now they'd have to deliver him in the flesh.
So that's when I've decided to bring in a friend. I had a friend who was living down south, who was a student, and I actually rang him up and asked him if he could do me a favour, which was just to look very smart and that he'd be picking up a parcel. I didn't actually want to scare him, say, oh, you're going to be picking up $3 million worth of jewellery, so I just tried my best to keep it to a minimum, where he'll feel confident in doing it.
A 24-year-old student from Slough, and yet beautifully dressed and coiffed, no doubt. He posed successfully as the prince.
In order to impress the jewelers that the prince was genuine, the gang hired a bodyguard and a fleet of chauffeured limousines to escort His Royal Highness.
I got a phone call from the office to say that there was a very important job when I got to Heathrow to pick up an Arab prince. When the prince got in, he was soon followed by a bodyguard who sat in the front next to me. I was told to lock the doors of the car, and we drove off.
A convoy of cars took the prince to meet the Bijan representatives, who were waiting on the forecourt of the Sheraton Park Hotel. The plotters, meanwhile, remained in Manchester, running the operation by remote control. Neither the bodyguard or the chauffeurs had any idea that they were taking part in a major sting.
Everything was kosher. They weren't aware of any wrongdoing. As far as they were concerned, they were picking up the prince. He was the prince. That's all they were aware of. Bijan representatives, they were already there waiting. All of a sudden, what happens? Limousines out of nowhere. It's just like something out of a film.
There were so many people involved that I could cast of hundreds, all innocents, and nobody had an idea what was going on.
I was expecting the prince to get out at that point. I thought that was going to be the end of the journey. But in actual fact, he stayed in the back of the car, and he asked the bodyguard to get out and make contact with some people he was due to meet at the hotel.
The sting was now at its most critical stage, and in Manchester the gang began to get the jitters. They were sure the student from Slough playing the prince would never survive a face-to-face meeting with the Bijan reps. They phoned the prince and told him to get the bodyguard to explain to the Bijan reps that he wished to view the goods at his Mayfair apartment in private.
The prince ordered the bodyguard to take possession of the bag. I think his words were, in effect, I want to view goods inside that bag, go get it for me. There's no doubt that the victim would have viewed the bodyguard, who was quite a large stature, as intimidating.
But of course the bodyguard was just doing his job. He had no idea that by taking the case to the prince, he was playing the critical role in a major robbery.
At the end of the day, the whole case hinged on the handing over of the bag. The bodyguard sort of going from one to the other, give me the bag, give me the bag. And he had nothing to do with the bodyguard, he was just doing his job, he was hired. And I always thought that it was funny, it was ironic that at the end of the day, after all the planning that's gone into it, at that very moment in time, it could have just fallen flat on its face.
But it all worked perfectly. The bodyguard gave the case to the prince in the car, who immediately drove off with the chauffeur. Back at the hotel, the jewelers panicked, and the bodyguard and abandoned chauffeurs began to realize that everything was not as it had seemed. One of the chauffeurs left behind was Mohammed Rafiq.
Some people and security from the Sheraton Park Hotel, they all came out and wanted to know what happened, and they were screaming and shouting that we've been robbed and the jewelry's gone, and the security especially, they thought that the guard was responsible for all this, but I think he did not know what was happening himself.
The only person who didn't yet realize anything was wrong was Michael Blackstein, the prince's chauffeur, and he was driving the getaway car.
At that point, I still didn't realise that anything untoward was going on. I felt that the prince was going to the bank to withdraw money to purchase the goods.
But the plot was beginning to unravel.
You know, when I realized that something is not right, I thought, you know, this is going to be a serious thing or something. I phoned Michael up to come back to the hotel straight away.
I got a phone call from Rafiq on my phone. The person the Prince had been meeting was somewhat upset and he had called the police, and he felt that it would be better for me to return to the hotel.
Critically, though, Blackstein didn't realise the seriousness of the situation. And the Prince, oblivious to exactly what he had in his hands, seemed to be rather enjoying his role. Although it suited the gang that he didn't know the full extent of the crime, his lack of urgency was causing some concern.
He's playing it very cool, he's not aware what he's got in his hand, and saying what's going on, and he's saying that, we've turned back, we're turning back. That's when it was just panic stations. It's like, what did you say? What, you're turning back?
And then to make matters worse, the Prince's phone ran out of power. In desperation, he borrowed the chauffeur's mobile.
The so-called Prince was making calls on the mobile, clearly seeing it's not working, it's not going to plan. And at that stage it wasn't going to plan, to a degree. And so I would imagine they themselves must have been pulling their hair out.
We've asked him, right, listen, just stop. First of all, just stop. You need to somehow or another get out of the car and run for your life.
The Prince asked me to pull over. He was having an intense conversation on the phone. I couldn't understand exactly what it was about. I couldn't hear it at all, but he was speaking quietly into the phone, and he was very relaxed. And at that point he said that this was a personal conversation. Would I mind waiting outside the car? Which I did.
Farce becomes even more farcical because there came a time when the chauffeur, who was a genuine chauffeur, needed to relieve himself.
And at that point I was feeling very uncomfortable. I needed to go to the toilet very urgently. I'd been needing to go for some time. I have a bladder problem and I can't go too long without, and I had been an awful long time without going. I waited for a few minutes and the Prince was quite relaxed at the back of the car, still talking on my phone, and I had no idea how long he was going to be. So I said, would you mind if I popped over to the hotel across the road to use their toilet? He said, not at all, and he carried on talking on the phone. I rushed across the road, went to the toilet in the hotel.
I've asked what's going on. He's saying the chauffeur stepped out and he's gone to the loo. I'm saying, well, where are you? I'm sat still in the back of the car, the limousine. So he said, listen, just get the hell out of there. Whatever you do, just get the hell out of there. He's got out, he's ran for it.
And when I came out, he'd gone.
And at that moment, Prince Mohammed of Brunei, alias Zaman, this 24-year-old student from Slough, quickly decamped with the jewellery and ran off through the crowds of Knightsbridge shoppers, carrying the Bijan bag with £1.5 million worth of pink diamonds which have never been seen since.
Apparently, from what he told me, he caught the tube home from there.
really did seem as if the gang from Manchester had got away with it. They'd hoaxed American jewellers Bijan into handing over £1.5 million worth of jewels to a phony Arab prince. Back in Cheetham Hill, the mood was euphoric.
The first time we actually opened this bag with the stuff in, it was just, what can I say, it was just like, well, you needed sunglasses just to look at it, you know, the sparks, and it was just amazing. You know, you gotta remember, we're from Manchester, local area, and we've never seen nothing like this before, unless you've seen it in films. So it was just, you know, to actually look at the pieces individually and look at the craftsmanship. It was just something else, you know.
£1.5 million worth of diamonds have been snatched from the forecourt of the Sheraton Park Hotel in London. Salesmen from top American jewellers Bijan were duped into handing over the gems in what appears to have been an elaborate hoax.
You're getting up to have a shower one day and you put the radio on, and they're talking about Bijan, $3 million heist, while you're having a shower.
It was a spectacular coup, and getting more spectacular with every headline. The police were feeling the pressure.
To be perfectly honest, we had very little information or any real evidence of substance against the criminals concerned. We had the description of one person who had acted as the prince, and then the only other concrete evidence that we could work on was the fact that a mobile telephone had been used to carry out the offences from the first moment.
It was the mobile phones, the crucial tools which had made their sting possible, which were to prove their ultimate undoing. For all their planning, halfway through the hoax, the phony prince's mobile had run out of power. To keep in touch with his masters in Manchester, he'd resorted to using the chauffeur's phone. This gave the police a vital lead.
And every time a telephone call was made, it was like a fingerprint being left for us to follow up. The various calls could easily be linked together by using itemised billings.
The itemised bill from the chauffeur's phone allowed the police to find out who the prince had called. And then came another breakthrough. They were able to trace the source of one of the other mobile phones used by the gang.
We also established that this telephone had been bought from Woolworths in Cheetham Hill, Manchester. And we had a stroke of luck because we established that it was a prepaid telephone. And this was pretty unusual in November 1997, because they'd literally, only in those last few weeks, come onto the market. This telephone was one of the first sold within that Woolworths, and the sales staff could actually remember making the sale.
Even better, the shop still had the CCTV footage that showed one of the gang buying the phone.
We realised that one of the suspects was actually on film buying the mobile telephone. It was a major breakthrough in the inquiry at that point. I'd say the major breakthrough.
The gang member who'd bought the mobile had made an elementary mistake. The phone, which should have guaranteed anonymity, would lead the police straight to the lad's doors.
He was quite stupid enough to go into a shop where they had proper surveillance. He could have easily gone somewhere else, but he was just being lazy, and he ended up going to a store which was local to where we lived, which linked a lot of things together, basically.
The evidence against the boys was building up, and Scotland Yard detectives mounted a surveillance operation.
They started doing surveillance on us, and you just notice them. You notice you'll be driving somewhere and you'll see someone tailing you, and it got to a stage where he was pretty much aware of it. I mean, we're probably paranoid anyway, say, let's just say at normal times, we're still aware of, what's around us and what's going on, and it's built into you basically. It's funny because it's like a game of cops and robbers. You had these guys following you around, you was aware of it, and you played games with them. You just kept on your toes.
The police were confident now they had the right suspects. Armed with search warrants, they raided several houses in Cheetham Hill.
Eventually, when they come, you knew they were going to come, and when they come, they didn't actually really have anything apart from the co-defendant who stupidly, had some of the jewellery placed in his cousin's flat.
We were lucky enough to find some items of jewellery which had been hidden in a loft at one of the addresses.
The police now had enough to make their arrests.
They actually raided about 11 houses in Manchester, and it was about the same time they happened. It was like first thing in the morning, bang on the door, and when I heard that bang, I just knew, well, this is it.
When arrested, they very soon broke down and confessed. It's hard for me to think that older, more experienced criminals of the kind I more habitually defend would ever have done that. So it is a remarkable combination of a very professional and imaginatively conceived crime, but allied to the whole thing collapsing like a house of cards the moment the police arrived, when they confessed.
There was some disappointment when people were apprehended. Certainly in the Cheetham Hill area, people were saying, it's a shame that it was a clever one, that, and it's a pity. I think when one considers, like in the real sting, when people get away with it, that they nearly got away with it, and I think this is why there's that degree of sympathy towards him.
All of the gang were convicted, including the phony Prince, the hapless student from Slough who received a 12-month sentence. Saq was given 3.5 years in jail.
Because it's a white-collar crime, you won't actually be going down for a long time. So it didn't put me off, until actually when I did go inside, and then you see the different side of it. You think it might be easy, but it's not easy being inside. You just go with the system and you make friends, and you just go day by day, try and forget about the outside. You don't exist, basically. You don't exist, do you? Not to your family, you're inside and you can't do nothing. If you hear bad news, you can't do nothing. You maybe try and block it out. That's about it.
Certainly, a crime like this can be romanticised, but one's got to remember that it's the whole criminal fraternity who live off these crimes. They are just one arm of the criminal world, really. Although they might be viewed as fairly young in age, they've carried out this audacious crime. Essentially, they're nothing more than they're thieves.
Although the gang was brought to justice, one mystery remains. Today, more than 3 years after the heist, the police still have no idea where most of the diamonds are.
I'd be surprised if they had ever surfaced again. I believe that they've been broken down into separate gemstones and sold off individually for a fraction of what they were worth as a whole.
The police no doubt would love to know where this jewellery has gone. It could still be out there. It may have been broken up into the constituent jewels, no doubt. It may have been sold on the black market. It may have been recycled. Who knows, perhaps it even ended up in Brunei.
And what of the gang's insider? The woman from American Express, who supplied the critical security information. Despite a thorough police investigation, she's never been found.
I think without a doubt, all of those sorts of crimes, and probably that one is a classic case, had to stem from somebody somewhere knowing something about the individuals concerned and having access to their personal information. But of course it's never been proven to be the case.
It's not unusual to find that ingenious crimes are committed by brilliant defendants, and it's a perversion of the natural talent which they have. And sometimes one thinks it only takes being born on the wrong side of the tracks to make one man a famous criminal and another a famous doctor or lawyer or banker.
Saq Mumtaz was released from prison last year. He's still looking for full-time work.
When you live in the high life, okay, you're enjoying it. It's short term, you know, you're always watching your back over what you might have done to obtain that high life. Whereas now, I mean, I can sleep at night and, you know, I've got nothing on my conscience. And, I mean, I've seen both sides of life and I know which side I want now. And that's a normal life like everybody else.